Welcome all, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Ben Cordingley, and I'm an enologist here at the AWRI. In the spirit of reconciliation, the AWRI acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. In this session, we'll look at the standard procedures for grape sugar and colour measurement. Before we jump in, a couple of quick reminders to anyone who is new to AWRI webinars. If you'd like to provide a comment or ask a question, please click on the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar and type in your question and click send to shoot it through. We'll be holding a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, but feel free to send in your questions at any stage. A reminder that this session is also being recorded, and you'll be emailed a link to view the recording on the AWRI's YouTube channel. For anyone who's just joined, welcome. Today's webinar topic is reviewing the standard procedures for grape, sugar, and colour measurement. It is with great pleasure to welcome Mr. Kieran Hurlem. Kieran Hurlem is a senior project engineer within the AWRI Commercial Services. Kieran's primary work focuses on sustainability within the wine and agriculture sectors. He's involved in life cycle analysis for wineries and wine businesses, as well as other agricultural and horticultural sectors. Recently, Kieran has been involved in reviewing and developing the quality assessment standards for testing and measuring grape sugar levels and colour in consultation with industry stakeholders. Kieran, if you're ready to make a start, I'll hand over to you, mate.
Thanks very much, Ben. I'll just share my screen. Fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Ben, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone joining today. So as Ben has touched upon, today I'll be talking to the recent review undertaken of the standard procedures for grape sugar and colour measurement as a means of quality assessment. So as we all know within the industry, wines and the grapes that they are made from are highly differentiated products influenced by a myriad of factors, including but not limited to colour, variety, growing region, vineyard characteristics, vineyard management practices, seasonal vintage and winemaking influences. There is no other consumable product with such a degree of differentiation or identification with the above factors. And for this reason, certain varieties, regions, vineyards, and vintages can command significantly different prices. For the sake of efficiency and harmony within an industry encompassing such highly differentiated products, clarity, common understanding, and agreement on important characteristics is highly desirable. And today's discussion will talk to recently reviewed standard practices for quality assessment to specifically address situations where bricks and colour are used as part of the process for settling payment or rejecting grapes. So I'll be stepping into these developed standard practices with the intention to highlight the core elements that underpin each procedure and provide some context as to what led to this review. Oops, sorry about this. Okay, can everyone still see the screen? Okay, so moving on. So to put this in review of the standard best practice documents into context, as a first point of call, I wish to touch on the Code of Conduct for Australian Wine Grape Purchases, developed by AGW back in December 2008, with the support from the Federal Government's Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. The Code of Conduct has been developed as a foundation for building relationships between growers and winemakers that are fair, equitable, and mutually beneficial, as well as to provide a quick and cost-effective dispute resolution mechanism. The code sets minimum standards relating to grape purchasing, including mechanisms for determining price, quality assessment for the purpose of affecting price and payment terms, and providing additional recommendations related to best practice in successful partnerships, which are included as a supplement to the provisions of the code. The code stands as a voluntary industry-owned code, with retained flexibility such that a code provides. And there exists systems in place to aim to safeguard the code against the potential to have this as a mandatory document. And it's important to highlight that the code is just a tool, and there exist many other options to help to build the relationships between growers and winemakers. A core element of the code is targeted at defining best practice grape assessment procedures. And this talks to my presentation today. So key factors within the grape assessment procedures highlight the importance for wineries to involve their growers as much as possible when it comes to vineyard assessments, encouraging the growers to inform the wineries as soon as they become aware of any change in the maturity, purity, or condition of the grapes that may result in a price deduction being applied to the grapes or rejection of the grapes. Where it is deemed practical, it is advised that grapes should be assessed against the maturity, purity, and condition standards and or graded prior to harvest, subject to final assessment post-harvest at the farm gate or the winery. A grower should always have the right to be present during a vineyard inspection, and this should be encouraged. And this is not just for the benefit of the relationship, but also a reasonable requirement for managing biosecurity and relevant work health and safety risks. So when assessing grapes against MP and C standards, or grading them or otherwise making assessments of grapes, signatories to the code must follow a few principles, with A being to avoid the use of subjective measures to determine price in circumstances where there are credible, objective measures readily available to measure the same or similar characteristics. B, where available, use industry-endorsed standard procedures. And this is where I'll be furthering the discussion today. So these industry guidelines are supplementary to the code, but they're referenced accordingly. And C, to clearly document the methodology and results and retain that documentation. So in supplementing this information and adding some further context, the ACCC Agricultural Unit conducted a market study on the wine grape industry back in 2018-19. And as a result of this, the ACCC recommended that AWRI, in consultation with industry stakeholders, review current industry guidance on quality assessment standards and amend the guidance to clearly reflect current best practice. So in collaboration with AGW, the AWRI and industry established a working group to develop standards for consultation, and this working group is still in effect today. Over the past 18 months, there has been significant work in the development and publication of a range of standardized methods, all lending their hand to aiding in understanding and defining best practice for quality assessment to assist winemakers and grape growers to sample and make assessments as accurately as is practical under all circumstances. These standardized methods have been and are to be endorsed by industry and regulatory bodies for the measurement of key parameters in grapes, for sampling in the vineyard, within the winery, different sensory protocols, sampling at the weighbridge, and also for validating secondary methods against the reference methods. A series of extension activities for the developed standards are in progress and will be in progress moving forward, with today being a primary example, whereby aiming to provide industry training and tools to aid in implementation of these developed standardized methods, and for the third parties to assess the validity of testing and sampling protocols and calibrations of facilities to aid in mediations and disputes. So the industry endorsed standard procedures, or following with the acronym IESPs, as we've discussed, form a necessary requirement when assessing grapes through MP and C standards. These industry endorsed standard procedures have been developed by the AWRI in consultation with Australian Grape and Wine, or AGW, and a defined industry reference group. These IESPs are available on AGW's code website, and this website is listed on the screen. There are a series of currently available IESPs, including standard procedures for measuring grape colour and standard procedures for measuring bricks or total soluble solids, and these will be expanded on further within today's presentation. There also exists standards and procedural documents available currently talking around standard methods for sampling grapes in the vineyard, as well as procedure for sensory evaluation of wine attributes. There are also a couple of further industry endorsed standard practices, as well as some other procedures which are out for comment. And these documents surround things such as sampling in the vineyard and at the winery, and upon receipt of fruit at the weighbridge, different criteria for validation of secondary methods for some of these grape attributes, different protocols for assessing grape purity and MOG, and also looking into pest and disease. But before we review the standard procedures for grape sugar and colour measurement, I feel it's important to highlight the importance of sampling within this process, both in the vineyard and upon receipt of fruit at the winery for downstream assessments within the laboratory. As we all know, sampling is an essential part of the inspection process and is critical to the accuracy of the final grade. If the sample is not representative of the lot, the inspection result will not reflect the true quality of the lot, and this is why standard procedures or guidelines have been developed to avoid these issues. So there exists a standard method and a guideline document on vineyard and weighbridge sampling, which will speak to some of these issues. It's really important to recognise that the basic principles of achieving a good representative sample include things such as sampling from multiple locations within a defined vineyard, incorporating consolidated grape samples to ensure that analysis is representative of a defined vineyard block or patch, and also incorporating enough grapes to ensure that at least minimum sample size requirements are met for specific grape analysis. And we'll touch more upon that as we delve into each of the two procedures that we'll be talking about today. So the guidelines outline some considerations, and I won't work through all of these in full today, but they detail conditions for developing a sampling plan, advising upon the minimum sample quantity for each specific analysis, how to maintain the samples in their best condition, and also delaying samples in the event of recent rain, heavy fog, dew, or heavy irrigation within the preceding 24 hours. So all of these conditions are rolled into a guideline document to aim to assist both growers and wineries in making sure that what is being analysed is as representative as possible of the entire harvest unit. The guideline document also further defines sampling procedures when sampling at individual points within the harvest unit to ensure a true representative sample is achieved. And through your sampling practices, you are ensuring the best representation of your block. And this is essentially mirrored within a weighbridge sampling guideline document as well, which is still out for comment at the moment, where we are trying to make sure that we're defining that as we go through our different procedures, that we're dealing with the best potential feed source, so that we can make sure that we minimise any errors and minimise any potential disputes. So one of the other considerations that leads into the standard procedures for grape sugar and grape colour measurement is that it's advised that samples collected in the morning period should ideally be processed for compositional analysis later that same day within the laboratory. If this is not viable, it's advised that samples should be stored refrigerated until the following day for processing. So a lot of these sort of key attributes of the sampling to make sure that we're working with that best possible sample moving forward are all defined within the guideline documents. So the first industry-endorsed standard procedure that has been reviewed and developed throughout this process is for the measurement of Brix or Baume in grape juice, or otherwise known as the measure of the total soluble solids. So this method is specifically to address situations where Brix measurement is used as part of the process for settling payment or rejecting grapes. I feel it's important to note that these standard methods are a work in progress. And there will be ongoing work to refine these according to best practice. And this is all dependent on changes in technology or industry guidance and feedback, and also demand to ensure that these documentation and procedures are fit for purpose moving forward and are working to the best efficiency for the industry. I've highlighted on the screen a full contents list of the details within the industry endorsed standard practice for Brix in grape juice. And it's important to note that because these standards are formal methods, which must meet international standards for reference methods in terms of content and approval by the National Measurement Institute, or NMI, there is an extremely extensive list of details that goes into each of these standards, and they include full details on the minimum calibration requirements, validation procedures, and also uncertainty of measurements. So there is a lot of detail in there. However, there are, and I'll speak to this in a minute, but there are guideline documents which sit at the front of these documents to help with the process moving forward, and to help have them as more user-friendly within the industry. So the standard also includes the requirements to validate internal methods against this reference method, either internally through an either internally or through an external accredited laboratory. So there's no expectation that every facility changes every detail of their current procedure. That's not what this is designed to do. But it's to enable each facility to validate in some way that their current practice is giving equivalent results to this reference method, so that we can have some homogeneity between the industry. So this is critical because a single document doesn't have the ability to cover every piece of equipment or technology that is used in the industry. Given that there are hundreds of different suppliers and options available, as well as the way that different wineries ranging from small to large operate. There's no way that one document can speak to all of that, but if we have a reference document that we can then validate our procedures to, this is where the power of the document comes into it. But as a part of that, we can provide information on how you validate your internal method, so that we can ensure that we are achieving uniform outcomes for all. So as mentioned up front, these standards are formal methods and hence are extremely detailed, which we understand isn't optimal. So we've gone through the process of distilling these standards down to form guideline documents in the form of procedural guidelines to highlight the key elements of the analysis for bricks and colour, with any necessary further detail sitting behind these guideline documents, as was mentioned before. So these standards don't necessarily replace in-house methods, but any such method needs to be suitably validated against this method. And where a different analytical principle is used to determine bricks or Baumé in grape juice, a more extensive form of validation against this reference method is required. So to work through some of the details of the procedure for the measurement of bricks in grape juice, we highlight sample preparation conditions, which flow on from the point of achieving a representative sample, as discussed previously, from the vineyard or from the winery. So for bricks measurement, we advise sourcing a minimum of 20 bunches and destemming and mixing the berries by hand. A series of 500 berries are then randomly selected and crushed, ensuring that all of the berries are crushed. The juice can then settle naturally to remove the solids. Otherwise, a centrifuge can be used to pre-treat the sample. And once again, this is trying to make this as adaptable to all parties within the industry as possible. So it all depends on the different laboratories facilities. The method and guideline document then steps through a case study of a specific procedure.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say it again?
Then steps through a specific procedure for measuring a sample and includes typical procedures for benchtop or digital refractometers, as well as handheld refractometers. So once again, trying to have that adaptability to all people and all laboratories, all facilities. So these typical procedures are highlighted within the guideline document for each instrument, but as highlighted previously, where a different analytical principle is to be used to determine bricks or Baumé in grape juice, for instance, using a secondary method such as MIR spectroscopy, there is a supporting document which outlines a more extensive form of validation against the reference method, and this would be required to be followed. Moving on to the second industry-endorsed standard procedure that has been reviewed and developed throughout this process, which is for the measurement of colour in grapes, expressed as total anthocyanins. And again, this method is specifically to address situations where colour is used as part of the process for setting payment or rejecting grapes. This method is intended to be a reference method that other industry-based methods can be validated against, and to act as the method of choice when arbitrating any potential disputes. Like the measurement of bricks, this standard does not necessarily replace in-house methods, but any such method needs to be suitably validated against this method. And again, where a different analytical principle is used to determine color in grapes, for instance, a secondary method such as NIR spectroscopy, a more extensive form of validation against this reference method is required. For colour measurement, we require a representative grape sample as discussed previously, and that is something that's really critical to quality assessment as we move forward and getting that understanding of what a representative sample is. With colour measurement, we require then a randomised sample taken from a base of a minimum of 40 bunches using the method outlined within the screen. So these guidelines speak to the quantities of berries required to achieve a suitable amount of sample for the measurement. And for colour measurement, we homogenise the product and talk through the procedure and conditions for achieving the final extract for analysis through the UV-Vis spectrophotometer. The guideline documents also detail calculations and tools to guide the analysis as effectively as possible. And this information has been derived from a series of industry-specific references, and all of these reference documents are listed and support the guidelines. So you can find all of the reference documents which have been used to support these documentations, either within the guideline document or the full industry-endorsed standard procedure. So, as I mentioned up front, all of these procedures have the necessary determination of the uncertainty of the measurement. And so stepping into the uncertainty of measurement, this does lend its hand to a bit of a complex discussion point. However, it's really critical in understanding, in ensuring that there's this understanding of uncertainty of measurement between growers and wineries, as well as on the regulatory front. So the understanding methods define the calculation principles for determining the uncertainty of measurement for each individual method, and define that each laboratory must demonstrate its typical UOM as part of its validation procedure. So the UOM for both Brix and colour measurement have been described to be within the region of plus or minus 5% for an individual laboratory on replicate homogenates. But it's important to keep in mind that the error defined is driven in a large extent by the natural variability or natural variation in a group of berries at a given time. So as an example, if we had a truly homogeneous group of berries, the error we would see within the measurement can be down to anywhere around 1 or 2%. But when we start sampling and randomizing berries and selectively taking 100 gram or 200 gram portions of the overall bunch, we start to see the error increase because we aren't dealing with a homogeneous system. But the way errors work and are classified is based on the distribution of the results collected. So the reality of the situation requires the UOM to factor in the distribution of the outcomes. And with ongoing work, we're trying to put some extra controls in place to reduce these stated uncertainty of measures. But it's just, I wanted to try to better explain why there's some higher levels of uncertainty of measure there throughout the process that is gone through within the lab to achieve those results. So there's also considerations around how these uncertainty of measurements are applied to the tolerances that are already applied within the winery. Because it isn't always as intuitive as it potentially could be. So these methods try to better define this for assisting parties in any potential disputes. And as we've said all along, as part of the standard methods for grape sugar and colour measurements, there is a defined validation procedure, which has been discussed throughout today's presentation, to ensure that your in-house analysis aligns with an accredited independent laboratory that uses the reference method. So the minimum validation requirement required to use this method or a substantially similar method as already used in the facility is that prior to the method being put into use, the laboratory needs to validate its results against an independent source. So the process of the validation is stated in the slide on the screen at the moment, and it requires sourcing 10 separate samples of grapes and repeating the following process as defined. So for each sample, we would go through a in-house and also an accredited independent laboratory and calculate the difference in the result from the in-house analysis and the accredited laboratory, and then average the differences. The average of the differences should not vary by 10% of the mean of the sample results from the source laboratory, and no individual results should vary by more than 15% from the independent result for the procedure to be confirmed valid. Within the guideline documents and also the industry-endorsed standard procedures, this method is defined, and we've got a list within those documents to have some insight as to how the calculation works, and also what the tolerances within the calculations are. So we also advise that at the beginning of each season that this procedure should be repeated to ensure that there are no changes that have been introduced that may affect the results, and it's important throughout all of this. And one of the things that is important, sort of reading between the lines of the presentation today, is that it's really important to document all results and that level of documentation to ensure that there's transparency between parties. So, as has been stated a few times, if the facility wishes to independently validate their method or use a technology significantly different to that outlined in this standard, there is a much more rigorous validation procedure which is required, and that procedure at the moment is out for comment, and we'll be formulating part of this discussion moving forward. So that's all from me today. I really appreciate you taking the time out to tune in. I would really like to thank the funding bodies in Wine Australia and Australian Grape and Wine for supporting this work. I'd then like to extend a big thank you to Anna Hooper of AGW and Eric Wilkes of the AWRI for their ongoing consultation and collaboration, as well as the industry reference group for their insights and reviews of the industry standards and guidelines. And yeah, thank you very much everyone for tuning in. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to take those. And yeah, thank you, Ben, for moderating this session.
Thanks very much, Kieran. That was some really interesting information. I'm sure everyone got a lot out of that. We've had a couple of questions come through. Trevor is asking, for the validation requirements for the 10 samples, over what time frame and frequency should this take place?
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. So I think I mentioned within my last slide that the validation should hopefully take place prior to each season. So essentially the start of every year that you can work through. Ideally, you would be analysing or doing your in-house analysis at the same time as the external laboratory, so that you can align those as best as possible. So yeah, I would ideally say that within the 48-hour period.
Excellent. We've had another question from Maria, who's asked, when will the rollout of those standards be, and what training is going to be undertaken?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So there are currently these procedures and a few other, so the vineyard sampling procedure as well as a sensory procedure are currently on the AGW code website now. So we're working through a series of internal and external extension activities, which we're hoping to roll out over the next couple of months. So through that, we'll be going around to or virtually, depending on the situation at the moment, going around to different regions and talking to this documentation and providing assistance within the process.
Excellent. Thanks, Kieran. We've got another question that's come through from Michaela asking, she said, last year we sent juice rather than grapes to our independent lab for Brix and Beaumay. Is that still suitable, or does it need to be grapes as per your slideshow?
That is something I will follow up on, but based on this, if we're going from the same source, it would ideally be grapes, so that we can provide or the exact same material that essentially we're using within our own in-house is being sent to the accredited laboratory. I will need to ask around whether if the process of doing the, I suppose, the extraction within the in-house laboratory to then be split to each of the for the in-house analysis as well as the accredited is suitable, but I'll need to take that one offline.
Okay, we'll follow up on that one. Jonathan is asking, are you able to comment on the non-analytical assessment methods? The code refers to taking samples back to lab and assessing multiple samples. Where is the AWRI at in terms of field level assessment validation in terms of flavour, aroma and visual parameters?
Yeah, so that's something that I personally don't have a current handle on. All of this is sort of going through the key parameters around quantifiable measures. So that's something I would need to have a discuss internally around some of those non-analytical measures, especially around, I suppose, with some of the non-analytical measures there does bring a level of subjectivity into the equation. So this process at the moment is defining some standards which can be implemented so that we can assist with the those quantifiable measures before we then move into the other aspects.
Thanks, Kieran. We've got another question from Ron. You mentioned that grape samples should be refrigerated if there's a delay in the lab analysis. So how long can you keep samples in the fridge? And if they were frozen, perhaps, would that have any impact on grape parameters such as sugar or acid or anything else?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. It is something that we are looking into and looking into around the stability of some of these parameters, whether that being frozen or refrigerated. I don't currently have the data in front of me, I do apologize, but I believe that work has been done or is being done. So I could potentially take that offline and provide some further information on that. One of the recommendations at the moment is just that once we're, I suppose, if you can analyze as soon or as close as possible to the point of sampling, then that's going to be the best at achieving that instantaneous result for you, so that there's no interfering factors which could be driving any variability in the results.
Awesome. Okay, we'll get back to you on that one, Ron. Brian Simpson has asked, who will ensure that wineries using in-house colour measurement are being validated?
Yeah, thank you for that, Brian. That's another one that I need to take offline. I do apologise, to see how that would be, I suppose, audited or how that would that approach would work. But yeah, can definitely follow up on that one for you.
Excellent. All righty. It doesn't look like we've got too many more questions, Kieran. So we might make a finish there. Thanks very much for your insights, Kieran, on those standard procedures for grape sugar and colour measurement. I'm sure everyone got a lot out of the session today. So I'd like to thank the audience for getting involved and asking questions and taking part. I'd like to remind you that, as always, there will be a recording of this presentation available on the AWRI's YouTube channel. I'd like to also acknowledge Wine Australia for providing funding and support for webinars through the AWRI Extension Program. Just a bit of information about the next webinar that's coming up. We have a webinar on filtration and filterability with Dr. Paul Boyer from Blue H2O Filtration. That will be held on Thursday, December the 16th. So if you'd like to register for this session, please visit the AWRI website. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.